We're going to move on to the next panel. It's called Sourcing Project Capital. And we have a moderator that's going to be coming up, Drew Lafond, partner of MLT Atkins. And Drew was raised in Treaty 6 territory on the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation Reserve and is also a Shuswap descendant from the Simquet First Nation in British Columbia. Drew is a partner at MLT Atkins. He provides advice to businesses on corporate structure, finance, governance, and cannabis, liquor, and gaming licensing. He also has extensive experience in advising Indigenous and Métis clients on governance and jurisdictional issues. Drew advises clients on matters related to economic development, gaming, housing, commercial leasing, corporate governance, structure, and finance. Drew has also worked on nearly all aspects of the commercial side of cannabis, including incorporating and organizing the licensed producers under the medicinal and recreational regime, setting up licensed retailers in both Alberta and Saskatchewan, and advising on the process and considerations required to regulate on-reserve cannabis. So if you help me welcome Drew to the stage. Drew, we'll get your panel up here as well. Miigwech.
Don't say Natotamak. As indicated previously, my name is Drew Lafond. I'd like to call the panel members up to the stage here, and I'd like to invite Michael Risqueta, Frank Bush, Andrew Leach, Candace Loring, and Christopher Cornish. While the panel members make their way up, I'd like to just elaborate on the introduction. My name's Drew Lafond. I've been working at the firm MLT Atkins LLP for 10 years now. We have offices in 6 cities: Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Regina, and Saskatoon. Largest firm in Manitoba. We're also the largest law firm in Saskatchewan. I've been working in the area of corporate commercial law and working as a solicitor now for over a decade. I've been serving as a partner with the firm for just over 20 months. I also concurrently serve as the president of the Indigenous Bar Association, which is a not-for-profit organization comprised of Indigenous judges, lawyers, scholars, and academics, and students throughout the country. And I'm also a member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, grew up on the reserve until I was about 16. And, that's on my father's side. And through my mother's side, I'm a descendant of the Shuswap Nation, more particularly the Simp First Nation out in just north of Kamloops as well, too. In my role as partner with MLT Atkins, we've been asked by quite a few clients initially to help them organize their businesses when they were applying for licenses at the federal level back in the old ACMPR days, when the only cultivation license that was available was for medical purposes, and now we've transitioned over into the recreational market, advising clients basically from seed to sale in connection with Health Canada systems for cultivation, processing, distribution, and we have also transitioned into advising First Nations throughout Western Canada regarding on-reserve jurisdiction, constitutional rights, litigation, and everything else in connection with cannabis. It's a pretty broad area, and it reminds me of acting for a municipality for the most part, because when you get into the area of First Nations cannabis, it touches almost on every area, be it corporate commercial law, economic development, corporate governance, band governance, dealing with band membership, constitutional rights, and litigation. So it's certainly an exciting time to be a participant in the cannabis industry. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which the unceded territories, the traditional territories on which we're participating here today. I'd also like to acknowledge the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. We've set aside this day for them, and it's certainly something, a time for recollection and remembrance for those individuals, particularly those who have gone missing and their cases have been unresolved. This is a moment for us to pay those respects and to continue the fight going forward. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite the first speaker to the stage. And the first individual that we have is Michael Risqueta, he has over 20 years of direct investing experience in public and private equities, credit distress situations and various corporate restructurings across many industry sectors. Mr. Raqueta is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Tricome Financial. Prior to joining Tricome Financial, Mr. Raqueta founded and managed RCM Special Situations Fund and led the Canada Special Situations Group at Goldman Sachs Canada. Previously, he served as Managing Director at Amaranth Advisors in Canada and as the Director at CIBC Merchant Banking. So, welcome to the stage.
Great. Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'd like to talk to you about our business, but also talk to you about what the environment is like for sourcing capital for cannabis companies. So a little bit of background. Tricome Financial was founded coming up 2 years ago, but didn't really get going until, I guess, last summer. And the idea behind Tricome was that there was a void in the marketplace in providing credit solutions, debt products to cannabis companies. Banks are slow to act. They have a select group of clients that they'd like to deal with. And we knew two things. One, that there was a substantial demand for capital as this industry grows. But at the same time, we also knew that many of the companies, many of the largest companies, had unrealistic business plans, had unrealistic valuations for their shares, and that eventually there would be a significant event to occur that where investors, the giddy investors from the early days would leave the sector and capital would be very, very difficult to source. And so the idea behind Tricome was that really the best way for one to invest in the cannabis sector was through secured debt instruments that produce recurring cash flows to the investors through interest payments, through fees and whatnot, but also have share in some of the upside. So that's a little bit of the background. We raised our first amount of capital, outside capital, in September of last year. Our largest investor was Christian Sinclair and the OCN. So we're very thankful for him. He's joined our board of directors. We completed another raise and went public at the beginning of October. And we have another First Nations investor who is the largest investor in that round of financing, and that's the Elsipogtog First Nation in New Brunswick. And today we're publicly traded. We have a team of 6 professionals. We've closed a total of 7 lending transactions. And suffice it to say that what's going on in the market today, which I'm going to get to, is very attractive for our business because right now there are very few providers of capital, and we're one of them. So what do we do? We're not a bank. We're not a credit union. We are providers of solution capital. What that means is companies will come to us with either an opportunity or a problem, and we try and come up with a solution that meets their needs. Sometimes they want to buy a business. Sometimes they want to finance receivables on their balance sheet. Sometimes they need inventory financing. Sometimes they need to expand their business because it's going so well. And sometimes, and what we're seeing right now is some of them meet financial distress, and they come to us and to help fix their business. And why do they come to us? Well, because we're knowledgeable about the sector. All we do is lend money to cannabis sector, so we have a very, very good handle on who everyone is in the industry, the good players, the bad players, how we want to be positioned, and how we can help these companies. So we try and be value added and be supportive with all the companies that we invest in. We're also very flexible, we're creative in our thinking, and we can act very, very quickly. So that's our value proposition. Really, in creating Tricome, I think Christian and other shareholders saw the opportunity that we were going to create a platform to be financiers of cannabis companies, not just in Canada, but globally. And that we could expand our business not by just raising common equity, but raising investment vehicles to manage on behalf of third parties, to enter new business lines, to grow other businesses, and mergers and acquisitions. We think that the market for what we do is very, very large, in the tens of billions of dollars as this industry matures, and that we benefit by virtue of our founding shareholders who are experts in the cannabis sector, Origin House and Stoic Advisory, but also our team who have reviewed well over 500 opportunities in the year and a half that we've been actively looking at the sector. As I say, we've closed 7 transactions, we've exited 3, they've all been profitable, and we really pride ourselves on trying to structure and underwrite deals where we're first going to get our money back, then we're going to earn a return, and if there's upside after that, well, that's great. I want to talk to you a little bit about what the market's like today. I can talk to you all day about what we do and why we think it's great. Many of you want to know what it's like to source project capital. I wish I had better news. It is unfortunately difficult. It's difficult on many levels. First of all, there's some companies that sort of spoiled the market for everybody else by overspending and overpromising and underdelivering. Part of it is regulatory driven. There's not enough retail sales channels in the market. There's confusing regulations at the federal level, whatever the case may be. So there's some valid reasons why the execution has been slower than what people would like. But there's also some valid concerns. Many of these companies had these global ambitions and were able to raise billions of dollars and just threw money everywhere and have very bloated cost structures. Now that reality has set in, investors are fleeing from the sector. And so what's happening is some of those companies will go away, and they should go away. And some of those companies that deserve to get capital will get capital. And so we're at a stage right now where things are very much in flux. And so that will take a little bit of time to work through. Recently, I guess in the summertime, Health Canada announced that unless you had a site that was fully constructed, you would be at the back of the licensing queue. So anyone who was planning to build a facility but hadn't yet built one was basically put at to the back of the lines. And there was no capital available for those people because now, as an investor, you're being asked to take licensing risk, construction risk, as well as market risk. And we know that the surplus of cannabis is out there, and it's going to get worse. And so if you're late to the game, you might as well find a different business plan. That's just the reality. I think that's a good discipline because it's forcing the market to say, what else can we do? Should we be retailing it? Should we be setting up consulting businesses? Are there other areas of the value chain other than the cultivation? So it's forcing investors, executives, entrepreneurs to rethink what it is they're doing. I think that's part of what this capital allocation process that's going in the market right now. So we get lots of calls every day, and from people that want to do things and people that are doing things. All else equal, for us, based on what we do, we're going to lend money to companies that are already doing things. So startup capital is very difficult to come by. Obviously, it's not impossible. I'm not trying to dissuade you from ambitions and dreams and things like that. But it requires buy-in and support. It requires a good management team, people that have done that before, and it requires access to smart capital. The other thing I would say is the cost of capital has not gone down. It's only gone up. The banks have, to the extent the banks were lending to the sector, they put a pause on that. I actually was flew out here, and I ran into someone that I used to work with at CIBC. He's now deputy head of corporate banking at RBC, and just ran into him. I hadn't seen him for 10 years. And so we were talking about what I was doing, what he was doing. And it's just like, yeah, we spent a little bit of time evaluating the market, watching some other banks, notably BMO, get into the market. And we're saying, what are we missing? And then they get into it and they say, okay, well, we're going to put a pause on this. So think about it from a bank's perspective. Why do they need to be here right now? They don't, right? There may be in the future, but they're not now. So we would hear from many companies say, oh, we're talking to this bank, we're talking to that bank. It's like, great. Well, it's going to take you minimum 6 months to get through their approval process. So you want to wait for that and get cheaper money if it happens, or you get to market. So that's just a reality. There's market forces that drive the cost of capital. If there's ways that you can mitigate that, if there's partnerships, if there's ways to get to where you want to be with minimizing the amount of outside capital you have, then that's something that you should be doing. So I can talk to you more about Tricome, but I think I'll leave the mic open for others who have a different perspective.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Frank Bush. Make your way up to the mic. So Frank is a member of the Nisitwesik Cree Nation. He grew up in northern Manitoba. He holds a bachelor's degree in Indigenous Studies from the University of Manitoba, spent his professional life in the financial sector. Blue Bomber fan? Unfortunately. Holds 5 certificates from the Canadian Securities Institute in Securities, Derivatives, Technical Analysis, and Fixed Income. In addition to working with large corporations in Canada, he also has previous experience with First Nation businesses, not-for-profit organizations, and governments. He's an award-winning author and studied with the first ever Indigenous Executive Education cohort at the Harvard Business School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, through the AFOA Canada, and he's currently enrolled in graduate studies through the Harvard Extension School. So as a director of community engagement, Frank is responsible for building and maintaining relationships with First Nations and providing information and advice to First Nation Council staff and membership that increases awareness of FNFA, First Nation Finance Authority financing, investment, and advisory services. So everybody give a warm welcome to Frank Bush.
Is the clicker here? Tansei Kakia, Kitata Miskatenawa. I greet and shake hands with each and every one of you. I'd like to say Lim Limt to our Okanagan, Silix Okanagan hosts in the Westbank First Nation, where I currently reside. Do we got a slideshow coming up here? Or? I know the AV guys there, so that's the First Nation. There we go. That's the one. Okay, just want to make sure I know what I'm talking about, otherwise I'll start talking about the Bombers winning the Grey Cup, and I'm sure a lot of people from out east don't want to hear about that right now, so I'll kind of skip that. So I have been with the First Nations Finance Authority for the last 7 years, and long story short, we are a treasury board for First Nations governments. So we're able to lend to First Nations all across Canada who go through a process in order to get certified to be eligible, so that there is kind of a bit of a high bar to jump. About a third of the First Nations of Canada have gotten scheduled to our Act. We operate under the First Nations Fiscal Management Act, which is basically a law that helps circumvent and work around parts of the Indian Act that make it difficult for First Nations to borrow. I like to say all my bosses are brown. Okay, so in order to be on our board of directors, you must be a chief or counselor from one of our member communities. Our members are all invited to our AGM and they elect the board from amongst themselves. I would like to acknowledge a few of our members in the room. Sorry, I haven't seen everybody, but I did meet a few. I know we have representatives from the Osoyoos Indian Band, from Squayala, from Shawanaga, and Tk'emlúps-Tishishwapmek. And if there are other members in the room, I apologize, I haven't worked the whole room yet, so very good to see them. The members of the Finance Authority, including Opaskwayak Cree Nation, sorry, I almost missed my buddy there. They're able to just kind of like, after jumping through all the hoops and whatnot, they can basically pick up the phone and say, hey, I need some money, okay? So, Oniganu Sinclair can pick up the phone there and go, Frank, okay, I'm gonna need $9 million. And I say, well, when do you need to buy? And, there might be some paperwork to get signed. That's where Sherry Brandt sometimes comes in. So what this means, though, what our whole idea is basically just to level the playing field. Municipalities, provinces, and countries, on the basis of their creditworthiness of a government, are able to borrow money at favorable terms. And as Clarence Louis just said, First Nations are governments. Although that may not be as recognized in Ottawa, it is certainly recognized on Wall Street. And I have $725 million to prove that. So what we're able to do is provide short-term financing at 3.75, which is interest only. That's what we call construction or building project financing. So our members will just draw it down as they need it, as the bills come in, and they're only paying for the money they're using. Once construction or such is complete, we're able to transfer into our long-term financing, and that can be for up to 30-year terms. So whenever we build a school or a major renewable energy project, they're usually financed over about 30 years. We also, our long-term financing program, we just issued a bond in October. It was our 6th debenture. It was for $170 million at 2.72% interest fixed for 10 years, and it sold out in 5 minutes. So the amount of appetite on the capital markets, and I'll explain why, maybe in terms that you'll understand. The reason we're able to move our bonds so quickly is because it ticks a certain box. Right now, it's all the hippies who are retiring, okay? So they're RSPs of these people, they want to know where their money is going. They don't want to support, things like military, and they don't want to support, things that damage the environment. They want ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And First Nations Finance Authority bonds tick that box. So you actually have these massive multi-billion-dollar portfolio management companies who are looking to fill these bonds that all the baby boomers and hippies who are retiring want to fill. So it's a very great opportunity for First Nations governments to begin developing. I like to describe First Nations as an emerging market within a first world country. Right now, those big companies, they're putting this money into Africa and to Southeast Asia and countries that may have civil war. Canada's pretty good, considering all the problems that we see on the ground as First Nations people. Investment-wise, it's a very safe place to invest. So how were we able to do this? It took us about 20 years. We were founded in 1992, but we got legislative framework in order, and we got ratings from 2 of the big rating agencies. So Moody's and Standard & Poor's, they give every country, every city, every province or state, and every company in the world a rating. They basically give them the report card saying, how good are you at paying your bills? So we got an investment grade credit rating, which is really great because when we go to the capital markets, we're allowed to talk to certain groups like pension funds, life insurance companies, mutual fund companies that are only allowed to buy investment grade products. So these guys have billions of dollars and they're not allowed to play the stock market. So we give them the opportunity to purchase bonds, which is what they're looking for. How much we can lend to a First Nation depends on its own source revenue. So we actually do an analysis working with the band management to say, okay, what own source revenue you have and can we leverage that? The reason we do it that way is because that's how we are able to circumvent the Indian Act. We intercept the monies before they hit the reserve, and now the Indian Act doesn't apply. So this is what it looks like. The band chooses a revenue stream. It's directed into a trust account that we share with the band. We take the portion we need to pay the principal and interest on the loan, and the remainder is sent to the band office. So using that lockbox or intercept mechanism is what allows us to leverage these monies fairly quickly. About 90% of the monies we're leveraging currently come from federal or provincial government sources, which are often AAA or AA rated. And I'm sure Michael could explain to you what the rating system is. That's very good. So very beneficial. So how come Frank isn't talking about cannabis at all? Okay. I don't know where the weed went, okay? But we're actually possibly the only institution currently financing First Nations who want to get into cannabis. We don't really call it cannabis so much. We call it economic development. And anybody who might have been around back when the gaming boom started, when the big casino boom started, they knew what it was about. It was all about jurisdiction, and I really see cannabis in that same light. So when the first First Nations casino went up in White Bear, Saskatchewan, they were immediately raided by the RCMP, okay? So they took all the machines, broke a bunch of stuff, whatever else, and they said, okay, fine, that's great, let's go to court. So they went to court, and basically the Supreme Court of Canada had to say, well, Canada, you have no say in gaming because that's a provincial jurisdiction. Province, you have no say over First Nations because that's federal jurisdiction. So nobody decided, it's like when my kids, when they want something, go ask your mom. No, go ask your dad. Go ask your mom. Go ask your dad. That's where gaming fit in, and that's kind of where cannabis is starting to fit in as well. So the First Nations who decide they want to play by the rules, that's great, go ahead. Those that want to assert your jurisdiction, go ahead. But the idea is that whatever you decide to do, you're going to have money to do it. Okay, and I talk to people all the time. They say, hey, I got this great idea. I have no money. I have no job, but what can I do here? Can I get some millions of dollars? No, you can't. Okay, you need to have something, right, that's going to guarantee repayment, and that legislative framework is part of what helps us to get there. So what a First Nation needs to do, there's a process. They pass a BCR saying they want to be part of the Fiscal Management Act that takes care of the free, prior, and informed consent. They work with our sister organization, the Financial Management Board. If they want to leverage property taxation, they work with our colleagues at the First Nations Tax Commission. I believe we'll be hearing from Annie Jules later this afternoon. And then they develop financial administration laws. They put that framework in place. And I know Sherry's done a few of these, so always like to bug her about that, so it's good times. Then we look at financial statements. Financial performance certificate is awarded, and any First Nation that earns a financial performance certificate can become a member of the Finance Authority and start to borrow. So to date, we've loaned $725 million to First Nations governments at well below bank prime. Those monies have resulted in just over 7,000 jobs being created on reserve in Canada, just in the last 5 years alone. So I'm really looking to the future here because it is starting to snowball. We used to, when I first started with the Finance Authority, they had 9 members. Today we have 90. So I want to get us to 200 and 300, 600, eventually all 633 First Nations to be under the Finance Authority. At that point in time, I really believe that poverty can be defeated. So all of you who are being the pioneers in this cannabis industry, just like as it happened in the gaming industry, you're a part of that process. You are fighting the war on poverty, and I thank you and acknowledge you for that. Kinanaskimitten, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Frank. Our next speaker is Andrew Leach, who is the chair of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association. Andrew is a proud member of the Statimp Nation and is currently the chair, and he holds a bachelor and master's degree in business administration. In addition to serving as the chair, he owns and operates a successful management and consulting business, specializes in First Nation leadership and management support. And as chair of NACA, he participates in national policy tables pertaining to Canadian Aboriginal business and economic development. Andrew has 15 years plus of senior management experience with Indigenous organizations, 20 plus years of management consulting experience specializing in First Nation leadership support. So give a warm welcome to Mr. Leach.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Okay, so what makes the world go round? You ever hear it? Money makes the world go round? I've heard a few other things makes the world go round, but I guess this panel here, that's what we know. Money makes the world go round. And that's what I'm going to do, talk about with the few minutes that I've got up here. Just a point of clarification, I have been the chair of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporation Association for the last few years, and I stepped down just a couple of months ago because it's a pain in the ass being on the national board. Takes up too much of my time. But I'm still passionate about what we do, and really NACA is a affiliation of Aboriginal Financial Institutes, AFIs, from coast to coast to coast. There's over 50 of them across Canada. In this backyard here, there's the All Nations Trust. Anybody here from All Nations? Okay, I'm also the chair for the one, there you are. I'm also the chair for the one that's down in Vancouver, Stolo, Vancouver Island, Coast Salish territory, called the Talahout Aboriginal Capital Corporation. And in Alberta, they've got the Alberta Indian Investment Corporation, plus a whole bunch of others. And then in Saskatchewan, there's SEAF. In Ontario, there's Wabatek. In Quebec, there's SOCA. In far back east, there's the Ulnueg, and there's 50 some odd more around. What we do is we basically lend money and support to Indigenous entrepreneurs across Canada. And over the course of the last couple of decades, we've loaned out about 45,000 loans totaling over $2.5 billion. And during that time, we've been able to do as well as any lender out there in a pretty tough market. We know that getting capital to Indigenous communities is tough. They've put this regulatory stuff in our way, they've put these policy stuff in our way, and it's been tough. And when the government's tried to do this, they've failed. It's fallen flat on their face. They've called a bunch of lending programs, entrepreneurial support programs, a whole bunch of different names over the last few decades. And they've had a tough time doing it. But when they've turned it over to us, Indigenous controlled, community controlled throughout Canada, we seem to have done pretty well on that. And that $2.5 billion I mentioned was basically started from a seed capital of about $200 million. So we loaned it out, got it back, loaned it out, got it back, about 10 plus times now that we've been able to do this in our communities. A few years ago, you guys remember the ABC program, Aboriginal Business Canada? You remember that? Whatever happened to that?
Too long.
Yeah, exactly. She said it took too long. They decided to transfer that over to NACA. That's why you don't hear about Aboriginal Business Canada. It's run by NACA now. A bit of a sidebar here. Now we are the ones who are overseeing our own monies. And that gets a little bit funky, right? Because when it comes to our table, where should the money go? I'm the BC rep. I say, well, it should go to BC, shouldn't it? Right? And so that's one of the tricky things that happens at our level, is trying to know what to do with these monies that are coming in. But at the end of the day, that program got transferred over to us, and those were basically grant monies, right? And that wasn't a lot of money. If you wanted to borrow some money from one of our AFIs across Canada, we may have, I'm just throwing it out there as a ballpark number, up to 100 grand of free money, grant money. And any entrepreneur loves grant money. That's the best kind of money out there, right? Free. So they'd come borrow some money off us, get some of our grant money, go do a project, pay us back, and we'd put that money out to another entrepreneur, another project, another part of Canada. Well, on my consultancy hat, I've walked into some First Nations in the last few years, and they said, hey, there's a company is knocking on our door, and they're saying, have we got a cannabis business for you? And so I've taken a look at some of these, and I go, wow, they're a bit bigger than what normally our lending institutes can support, right? Some of them $5–10 million. Plus, if you think about the infrastructure it's going to cost to put them in there, and that's where these two gentlemen who before me, they could come in on some of these kind of projects. But we were looking at some of these smaller projects, so maybe dispensaries and some of those smaller ones possibly we could do. But in the last federal budget, the Liberals announced $100 million to go towards NACA to start this Indigenous Growth Fund, where we'd be able to put out possibly larger dollars for larger projects. And so this may be something where some of the cannabis projects that you're thinking about would come in. So I'd like to throw that out there. So if you're looking for your sources of capital, because that's what's going to make this thing fly. You've heard too, and I'm sure some more that are going to come. NACA has its website, naca.net. Go check it out. There's an AFI in your backyard that is going to be able to deliver some support for some of the smaller projects, but we're hoping quite soon to be able to deliver larger scaled ones. And I think that's all I got about for myself. Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite our next speaker up, Candace Loring. Candace is a proud member of the Gitwanga band from the Gitxsan First Nation. She's passionate about economic development in Indigenous communities, which led to her pursuing a degree in business management with a minor in psychology from the University of British Columbia. She has extensive experience working in the financial industry as an account manager, business banking. Drawing from her previous experience in the financial industry, Candace now applies her business expertise as a business development specialist, Indigenous community engagement with Mitax. And I'll leave it to you to explain Mitax.
Okay.
Give Candace a warm welcome, please.
Let's see. I don't have my glasses, so I brought my laptop. All right. So thank you, everyone. I, too, am a recovering banker, just for today. But I'm still very passionate about banking. So what is MyTax? I'm just curious, does anyone in the room know what MyTax is, other than the people I've spoke to today? That's basically what I expected, not many hands up. So we're not a tax company. Our history is actually in mathematics, so we're 20 years old. I fund research now, so I'm no longer working in the bank, working with businesses, but now I get to work with businesses and help them create their innovation roadmap. So what does that mean? All right, I gotta actually click this one. There we go. So what keeps companies from innovating? I think one of the first things I think of is, where do you even start? I talk to a lot of organizations. They're wanting to work with the university. They're wanting to leverage those expertise. But who's their first point of contact? How can they get in contact with the right professors, the right researchers that are actually going to do research that matters to their business? Oh, I got excited there. So that's where MyTax comes in. So again, the insufficient expertise in-house, no state-of-the-art equipment or technology, and an insufficient budget, and not knowing where to start. So with MyTax, what we are is we have an industry pull model. So we're not going out to communities asking if we can do research on them. In fact, that's the opposite of what we want to do. Especially with Indigenous organizations, historically we know research was done on us, not for us, and the importance of changing that narrative to nothing about us without us. So all of the MyTax research that we do is community-led. So we work with partner organizations, and they have a need within their organization. So, what is that? And you think of research, I feel that word is very limiting. Innovation, anything that you can't Google. If you have a need within your organization or your business and you can't Google an answer to that, that's what we do. So we're the R to your R&D. Let's see here. There we go. Sorry, trying to use two devices at once. All right. So we make innovation easy. How do we make innovation easy? Well, I'm one of a team of 100 business development specialists. We actually have two right here in Kelowna. I am the first with the organization who specializes in Indigenous community engagement. So I'm a business development specialist, Indigenous community engagement in partnership with UBC Okanagan and MyTax. And what we do and what makes us unique within the research community is we work directly with our clients, and we also work with the university. So I have an office at the university, but I cover BC interior, so pretty much Kelowna North. We are in the college polytechnic space as well, so I go all the way up to Yukon College, soon to be Yukon University. And part of what I'm doing with that community outreach is I am learning about what is happening in the respective universities or the post-secondary institutions, because they really are on the cutting edge of innovation. So I go out to the faculty, I find out about what's new and up and coming, and then when I'm out at events like this, I'm talking to community organizations, not-for-profit, industry partners, and finding out what their needs are, and I make those matches. So basically, I'm a professional matchmaker for business needs. Only business. So MyTax has experience. We've been around for 20 years. Again, I said that our roots were in mathematics, but we've now expanded to all disciplines. So anything from engineering, biology, chemistry, even fine arts. It's incredible some of the projects that we've had where visual representations are so impactful. We did a great project around water sustainability, and you can put a document on every table throughout the Okanagan about water research and how many people are actually going to read it. But you put a visual representation on a billboard or on the side of a bus, and it transcends languages, it transcends cultures. It's something that people can understand, and it resonates with them. So we have the tools to help you. Well, I'm one of those tools, I guess. So again, we have 100 business development specialists across Canada working with you. And we work right from the very beginning of finding out what your innovation roadmap is. It's very accessible. You don't have to learn how to write proposals. You don't need somebody in your organization. The researchers actually do that. So the hardest part of getting a MyTax internship is finding a partner organization. So if you're looking to do research with us, we're already over the hurdle. We have a 95% success rate. We're non-competitive and a rolling deadline, so you can apply at any time throughout the year. We also have $140 million to co-fund that research. So we provide solutions to all types of industry challenges. Again, so if you can't Google it, then that's a MyTax project. And, you know, really it's anything you can think of. I'm actually using an example at the end because it's one of those out-of-the-box things. If you can't Google it, anything that your organization needs, you know, within the Indigenous context, one of my favorite projects that I like to bring up is the Language House up at the head of the lake at the Okanagan Indian Band. That was actually something that MyTax was able to be a part of. You know, and I had a call this morning about a clean drinking water consortium. Right, and to be able to leverage, you know, leading edge researchers and be able to partner them with remote Indigenous communities who don't know where to start, that's what gets me up in the morning and keeps me out of banking. The call is strong. So we work with companies to create that innovation roadmap to transform your business challenges into solutions. And that's what's really incredible is, you know, when I go out to an organization that we've worked on a project with and to actually see the solutions and be a part of that. And on the other side of that, the students and the professors at the university, the students, these are likely their master's thesis. They're earning their degree. They're also getting publications. Business partners, they're getting the intellectual property. They're having their real life problems solved by some of our leading researchers. And the students also get the experiential learning of working with a partner organization. All right, so again, we're with you every step of the way. So right from the beginning of trying to figure out what your innovation roadmap is to getting those getting all of the paperwork together. Again, it's not really on the partner organization. We just need to really understand what your organization needs and ensure that your organization has the ability to mentor the research student, because it really is a reciprocal relationship. We're not just going to send a student out to your organization, you're going to plug them into a computer and sit them in the corner of a room, find us a solution. It doesn't work that way. Good partnerships are a reciprocal relationship in which the student comes, they're mentored by the organization, and they're learning just as much from the organization as they have to offer and give back from the organization. So you know, we help manage those relationships throughout the whole process. Sometimes it's not always a right fit. We'll pull a student, we'll bring a new student in and trying to find solutions through that, all the way to the very end of you know, seeing it through the implementation side of things as well. And what's really interesting about many of our programs is I'll go back after a project's been done, and it's amazing how many of our research students, the masters, PhD, and postdocs, that actually end up working for a partner organization after a MyTax relationship has been established. And sometimes their positions, they didn't even exist within the organization didn't even know that they needed this position prior to having a MyTax research student work with them. So again, we focus on your business needs. It is that industry organizational pull model. The students do their research through the lens of the partner organization, which is really important. I think that's where a lot of organizations are apprehensive with working with the university, working with research students, because they're scared that they're going to be paying someone to come into their organization and they're just going to be paying them to do their own research that has no real possibility of affecting their business. You know, at the end of the day, return on investment is of top priority. It has to matter to your business and it has to actually make a difference within your organization. So again, we support you every step of the way, but we also de-risk that relationship. So I mentioned earlier, we have $140 million to co-fund research. So we match dollar for dollar. So if you bring in a university student, the typical internship is 4 to 6 months. It's $15,000, $7,500 from the partner organization, $7,500 from my tax. Every project is peer reviewed, so we send it off and someone within that discipline will review it and decide whether it can actually be done within the time frame or whether it can actually even be done. And any projects that are over 6 internships, we actually do a 55% to 45% from the partner organization. So again, we can support and expand your entire innovation ecosystem. So with that, we're in 67 universities across Canada. So drawing upon our national network, I'm just one of a team of 100. So we're on the pulse of exactly what's going on at the university. Tomorrow, actually, we're going to hear from Dr. Zach Walsh. He's one of the examples I'm using. He's done numerous MyTax projects. It's really incredible to see some of the projects that are going on across Canada, and we don't always have the expertise within our region, though. So because we're a national network and we're across Canada, if I don't have somebody out of my university, I'll do a call out within BC to see if UBC or UNBC or any of the other universities I support have a research student who are doing research in that area. If we can't, we'll pull them in from Waterloo. We have a 180 internship unit project here in Kelowna. We've been bringing people in from Singapore because we don't have the talent locally or nationally to support that project. So we do have international collaborations as well. So our funding model is flexible. Okay, I already sort of went over this. 4 months up to 55% funding. To date, we've funded 30,000 research projects. That is going to be drastically increasing. Last year, we did 10,000 research projects. And we're on point right now that we'll be doing another 10,000 research projects this year. All right, here's my example. So just to get your mind out of the box of what is possible in terms of research, Ganja Yoga. It's a project that was done locally. Who knew? There was goat yoga, yoga on paddle boards. Well, actually, there are positive health implications to smoking marijuana and doing yoga. And we have the research to prove it. And why I chose this one actually was Dr. Zach Walsh out of UBC Okanagan. This was one of his projects in partnership with Doja. We're very active within the cannabis space. Any of the larger licensed producers, we've been working with many of them. If you go onto our external website, you can go through any of our projects and type up different things, but we're in all spaces. This is a cannabis forum, so I'm going to talk about cannabis. But if your community or organization has any sort of innovation needs, we're there to help. And this is where I would just like to invite you, because I don't have time to hear what your thoughts are right now, but I'll be here at this conference for the next couple days. So I invite you to come up, introduce yourself, and I'd love to talk more about what my organization has to offer. And I'd also like to talk about finance, because I'm still a finance geek. And to finish, I would like to thank our funding partners. So the Government of Canada, we are federally and provincially funded. So thank you to our funding sponsors. And that's it. Thank you.
And I'd like to call up our final speaker for the panel, Christopher Cornish. Christopher is currently the Director of Strategic Partnerships Initiatives and the Federal Lead for the Ring of Fire Mining Initiative in Northern Ontario. He works in the lands and economic development sector of Indigenous Services Canada and has over 15 years of experience working on Northern and Indigenous issues, having served as the Director of Policy and Intergovernmental Circumpolar Affairs for the Territories of Health at Health Canada, and as a Senior Policy Advisor to 2 former Ministers of Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. Give a warm welcome to Christopher Cornish.
I'm not sure if you have my presentation back there. There's a PowerPoint. I'll try to make up some time. I think we've kind of run out the clock here. But first of all, thank you to the conference organizers for for inviting us, and obviously the Okanagan people for hosting me and us here on your territory. And to Chief Louie for, I'm not sure if he's still in the room, but a lot of familiar faces here. Lands and Economic Development sector actually works with many of the partners here on the stage. We support NACA, we support the financial institutions, and as well as the NIDB, which Chief Louie is the chair of. I'm here just to talk to you a little bit about some of our programming that we have. We're kind of at the opposite end of the continuum when it comes to financing. As Michael was saying, if you don't have money, it's really kind of hard to get, a project off the ground. It's hard to borrow money if you don't have something sort of started up. So we have sort of a suite of programs that is really aimed at sort of the front end of sort of trying to develop concepts and trying to get business opportunities off the ground, get a foothold in the sector, looking at feasibility studies, training, all kinds of different Aboriginal entrepreneur programs, community opportunity readiness program. But the one I'm going to kind of talk to you most about today is called the Strategic Partnerships Initiative. How do I move that forward? So the Strategic Partnerships Initiative was started in 2010. And basically it's a federal program that's designed to sort of help federal departments and ministries come together and sort of support complex economic development projects that are generally multi-year projects and impact multiple communities. If anybody who's dealt with government, we're very siloed. This was a program that was set up to sort of act in a horizontal way so that the federal government could decide how we were going to prioritize and sequence and coordinate our investments to sort of support increased Indigenous participation in these major complex economic opportunities to sort of overcome some of those barriers to entry. We administer the program, but really it's made up of a committee of all the departments where we collectively make these decisions. Right now the program has about $14.5 million annually in grants and contributions to support projects, as well as another couple $1 million for operational funding to sort of support if people have to hire staff to run these projects or their initiatives. Primarily, the initiative has invested in the resource sector, and you can see mostly in forestry, mining, fisheries, energy, and I can talk a little later about what some of those initiatives are. But increasingly, we're looking for opportunities in other sectors. Tourism is a big one, and obviously, agriculture and cannabis is sort of the growing one. So we're very excited about having the opportunity to be here today and to learn about this sector so that we can understand it better to see how we can support that going forward. Part of the objective of the program is to bring in as many partners to support an initiative to get it off the ground. They can be provincial, federal partners, they can be outside of government, Indigenous organizations, industry, provinces, territories, academic institutions, and so forth. And the idea is to try to leverage every dollar investment so we can bring more resources to pool the resources to support the initiative. So you can see we've leveraged so far we've invested about $130 million in SPY funding over the last 10 years, and that is leveraged an additional $325 million behind that. There have been quite a number of projects. I won't get into everything, but I have some examples later. So the initiatives, as I mentioned, they have to be complex in scope, has to impact multiple communities, has to be designed in a way that it can sustain economic benefits over a long term, and an initiative can fund multiple projects or within an initiative, so multiple activities, where typically you may not have programs available to fund certain activities. What the SPY program can do is fill in the gaps, either with the funding or with creating greater flexibilities that allow other departments to do things that they normally wouldn't be able to do with their existing programs. So essentially, it's a horizontal approach for the federal government to work together and a framework for promoting collaboration. It's a way to stimulate those partnerships And to fund, it's a funding mechanism, as I said, to allow the federal government to be more flexible and responsive to the initiatives or opportunities that come forward. This here just gives you a little bit of a snapshot of the different sectors or current initiatives that we've had. Some of you may have heard of the Ring of Fire in the mining, or Voisey's Bay down east. We've got things going on all across the country in Alberta and Quebec and the Maritimes on tourism. Here in BC, we've had the Pacific Fisheries Initiative. Currently, the biggest one is the BC Clean Energy Initiative. There's over 100 communities involved in that, working on everything from how to get into an economic development opportunity around clean energy, solar, wind power, biomass, and every step of the way that it takes to get there. We've had energy transmission, oil and gas. So whatever sector that's, like I said, is a very big, complex opportunity, this is what we try to support. So initiatives typically, and this is part of it's not a call for proposals, it's not something where we go out annually and ask for ideas. We work through all of our regional offices at the federal level. And so it has to be a department that works with the communities and with whatever sector it is to try to identify that opportunity, put together that initiative, and then bring it forward for the investment committee to take a look and see if that's going to be an opportunity that the federal government could support on an ongoing basis. So I think I talked a little bit earlier about who can benefit from the funding. Indigenous communities, local governments, academic institutions, PTs, businesses, joint ventures, tribal councils, financing institutions. Whoever has to be part of the solution in an initiative is welcome to be a partner in that initiative. So in the cannabis sector, this is something that's very new for the SPY program. So we don't currently have any cannabis-related initiatives, but we're certainly looking to see how we could better support that. We do see it as obviously, I've been hearing a lot in the last day or so, the tremendous economic growth that this sector represents. And that's everything from the retail to the production, cultivation, but to all the ancillary services as well, whether it's in transportation, packaging, you name it. I'm not going to get too much into the whole regulatory piece. I understand that that's a bit of a challenge. But what we try to do from Indigenous Services within Lands and Economic Development is have program supports for those that want to get into the sector. So I've sort of talked a little bit already about SPY. The other one I was just going to quickly talk about before we wrap up is the Community Opportunity Readiness Program. This one is more for individual projects where if a community wants to come in and build a warehouse or even just start out doing an economic feasibility study, you can apply to this program to help get that initiative off the ground. It can be everything from business planning and advisory to actually funding the actual business infrastructure, for instance, an industrial park or a building. Economic impact assessments, just doing market studies on whether this is a good business opportunity or not, and in some cases trying to fill in the equity gap where financing isn't available, whether it's part of an expansion or an acquisition or what have you. And so we do, I think, 2 or 3 annual intakes for the CORP program. That is a proposal-based program. A couple others that we have, I think it was already spoken to here today. We try to match people up with the Aboriginal financial institutions where we can. We have the Aboriginal Entrepreneurship Program. But then there's other federal programs that we try to provide a navigator service for. So if it happens to be in skills and training with ESDC, or if it's accessing any of the programs from regional economic development agencies like Western Economic or ACOA or what have we. And then with ISED, which is our Economic, Social Science and Economic Development Canada. And so they've got a number of programs that are specific to increasing Indigenous participation, economic participation. So that's all I've got for today, but I'm not sure if they're looking to make these presentations available to conference participants after, but happy to do so. My contact information is there, so I'm around for the rest of the conference if anybody would like to follow up and make connections or help me make connections in our system. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to, again, say thank you to all of our speakers who attended today. Again, I extend an invitation to all of you to come up and ask questions to these individuals. They're going to be circulating throughout the conference for the next day or two. Certainly very knowledgeable individuals. Unfortunately, they cracked the whip on me. We have to keep the agenda moving, and I don't think we have enough time for questions at this point. So if you do have questions, please approach the speakers directly. And to the speakers, Ginanaw Scompton, thank you for making the travel out here. And as Chief Louis had indicated, money's opportunity, and if you guys are thinking about entering into a cannabis enterprise, these are the individuals who can be the gateway to that money and therefore the gateway to the opportunity. So give a warm welcome to these individuals, maybe even stretch your legs, a standing ovation or something would be very nice. But thank you guys, and we'll move on to the next topic.